Hello, people! Ziggy is out. He is outside and he's walking around, and I don't know what happened. He's into walking around outside today. So blessings. Recently, I got an email from a guy named Michael who sent me a link to a talk by Dainin Katagiri Roshi, and I've talked about Dainin Katagiri Roshi a lot on this YouTube channel, and my favorite books by him are what is called Each Moment is the Universe and The Light That Shines Through Infinity, and there's two other books credited to him, You Have to Say Something and Return to Silence. And I haven't read those as thoroughly as the other two, but his stuff is always good, and he's from the same lineage as Shunryu Suzuki. But I think he was a very bright light in terms of a person who could talk very deeply about Buddhist philosophy and what it all means. So this what do we call it? Transcript that Michael sent me is called Save All Sentient Beings, and I'll leave a link, and there's a lot of other transcripts and recordings of Katagiri Roshi's talks on the same website that you can look at and enjoy. And this whole subject of saving all sentient beings is a real interesting one. But what I want to get into here is what he says about the five skandhas. The five skandhas is one of these formulas in Buddhism that you learn early on when you're studying this stuff, and probably everybody who's been exposed to a little bit of Buddhism, they ought to know at least the basics of the five skandhas, but they usually leave people kind of confused. And I know I have done talks about this on this YouTube channel before, because when I went to, I decided I was going to go look it up on the internet before I did this video and write down what the five skandhas were just so I could remember them. And here I found something that I must have written earlier this year, because it's among a bunch of other things, and it's the five skandhas. So the first is rupa, shiki or form. Second, vedana, ju or sensation or feeling. Next one, samjnana or soul, which is perceptions. The next one, samskara, gyo, impulses, formations, mental activities. That is the difficult one. And vijnana, shiki or consciousness. That is the fifth one. So there's the five skandhas for you, and this will save me having to try to type them into the thingy and put them as on screen. Terop. Terop is a Japanese word. Why don't I remember the English word for this? Because I learned it in Japanese. Terop. Terop is when you have some words on the screen. What do we call it? Superimposition? I don't know. A lot of words that I learned initially in Japanese have stayed in my mind in Japanese, and then I have to translate them, because I didn't work in the film industry until I lived in Japan. So all my film industry terms pretty much start in Japanese, and then I have to translate those terms into English to remember what they mean in English. So I guess that's how the brain works and how language works. Anyway, I'm going to read you bits and pieces that Katagiri Roshi said about the skandhas. So here we go. In Buddha's time, Buddha always analyzed the human world and human feelings as five skandhas: form, feelings, perceptions, impulses, and consciousness. And also sometimes when the five skandhas are described in a little more detail, at that time the world is analyzed into 6 sense organs, 6 sense objects, and 6 consciousnesses. So they consider they don't think of consciousness in Buddhist terms. That word vijnana isn't used, or shiki isn't used in Buddhist terms to mean consciousness the way the Advaita Vedanta people do, and the way really a lot of people outside of that tradition, just regular old people, use consciousness as to say that there is consciousness. The Buddhists say there is eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. Those are the 6 consciousnesses. And they have 6 sense organs, which are eye, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, and 6 sense objects, which are the things that these things sense. So that's how they analyze that stuff. So skipping down a little bit, we have Katagiri Roshi saying, so everything which is formed is called state of existence, state of a thing which exists now. When something appears in front of you, this is called existence of a thing. But this existence of a thing must be something which you experience. That is, you can experience something, form, shape, or color and textures of a thing. Floor. If you touch it, you can experience something. So the existence of a thing is not something fixed apart from us. When you say floor is something existent, at that time the floor is not something apart from us, because it is always manifesting itself as a state of being. State of being is, well, you can experience through it. State of being is always giving us some information, which is called colors, textures, shape, etc. So that is a whole other way of looking at the world that the Buddhists have. We normally think that the floor, for example, exists before we get there. So, there's a room over there, and as far as I know, nobody's in that room, and there's a floor, and I assume that the floor exists even though nobody's there. The Buddhists don't assume that the floor exists even though nobody is there. That's what makes Buddhism real weird, and it's a very interesting sort of philosophy, and it builds from there. So that's something you have to keep in mind if you're trying to understand Buddhist philosophy. They don't assume that the floor in that room that I'm pointing to over there that you can't see exists when nobody's there to experience it. But then we could also say that the walls and the bed and the other things in the room also have a kind of a level of experience, so maybe it does exist still. It's a weird philosophy. At that time, you can really accept the existence of the floor. That floor is not something apart from us. It's really a state of existence as a floor connected with us. That's why you have to touch it. You can experience it with your hand, and then you can experience what the floor is. At that time, that floor is not something isolated from you. It is sort of a state of being interconnected with you dynamically from moment to moment. That is what we call state of being, which is called existence according to Buddhism. So he does that as a little prelude, and then he gets into this idea of the skandhas. So, feeling. Feeling means acceptance, reception. We translate it as feeling, but according to the Chinese and Sanskrit, I don't know if feeling has exactly the right meaning. According to Chinese and Sanskrit, that is reception, acceptance. So that's the second one. So form was the first one. When he talked about the floor, he was talking about form. Yeah, so sorry I skipped that one over, but rewind in your minds, and that's what we were talking about when we talked about the floor. That was form. Okay, so the second one is feeling. So he says feeling in Sanskrit and Chinese means acceptance, reception, receive, get, catch. So that's what I have in my notes here. I'm not sure what Vedana means in Sanskrit, but I can look at that Chinese character. I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but that Chinese character is a very abstract representation of a hand holding something, and if you use your imagination, you can sort of see it. There's a hand, and then there's four fingers stretching out and grabbing a thing. I learned these things from this book called Remembering the Kanji, which tells you the origins of the kanji, which really helps you understand. They show you the older forms where you can actually see it looking more like a hieroglyphic, and then how it got, turned into something else. Anyhow, so that is receive, get, or catch. That's what that Chinese character usually means. Next is perception. With perception, you can receive something through the consciousness. Feeling is more basic. Before you can get something through consciousness, you can receive it. That means connection with the floor, and then next moment you can perceive the floor through the six consciousnesses. So that is perception. Form, feeling, perception. Now we get to the tricky one, which I'll read, and then we'll read again, and read again, and it gets weird. The fourth, impulses. Later I will explain this. That's what he says. Sometimes we call it volition or will. It's a very complicated term. It's very difficult to find an appropriate term. But Edward Conze, says that this is the together maker. Basically, there is something to make something together. I don't know what it is. He laughs. It says in the transcript. This is called samskara. Anyway, I will later explain it. And then he goes into consciousness. Consciousness. If you perceive something, then on the bottom of your consciousness, on the bottom of your life, there are some powers, energies, to collect and make something. Form your experience through the perception and feeling, and then immediately the next is consciousness. So, impulses is sort of the basic nature of consciousness. And let me read some of these other things that I noted down here where he comes back to samskara. Okay, here's samskara. That is the 1, 2, 3, that's the fourth one. Yo, impulses. So, samskara means original nature of action. The Buddha says all are impermanent. In Japanese, in Sanskrit, what we say is not all. Literally, the translation is all samskaras. Samskara means original nature of action, working. The original nature of action is impermanence. I hope that helicopter is impermanent. And a little later on he says, we have to understand deeply the original nature of being. That's why Buddha says all is impermanent. This all is all samskaras. Samskara is original nature of action, which everything is structured by. Constant action, working. And he says, where does cognition come from? Cognition comes from the basic nature of action, which is called samskara. And later on he says, the core of zazen, which is called samskara. Samskara is impermanence, constantly working. And a little later on, the depths of existence, which is called samskara. Samskara, again, is impulses. In the version I learned is form, feeling, perceptions, impulses, consciousness. That is the version in the first translation of the Heart Sutra that I ever heard, which is Kobanchino's translation. Other people translate that last one as formations, mental impulses, mental activities. It's the basic. It's action at its most basic form when it hasn't really become an action in the terms that we would normally think of as an action, like a movement of the body would be an action in the normal terms. But this is like the most basic form of action which you can touch during zazen. That is Dining Katagiri's version of the 5 skandhas. And the 5 skandhas is interesting. So again, rewinding a little bit, in early Hindu thought, Hindu is a misnomer, and I say this a lot, but I've noticed that a lot of Indian people say Hindu, and a lot of people say I am a Hindu, so maybe it's not a bad word anymore. But it was originally a British term for the Indian religions, and it doesn't really cover, the things as they are. Anyhow, in early Hinduism, there was this idea of Atman, which is roughly analogous in early Hindu conceptions to the soul. In later sort of Hinduism, in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, Atman tends to mean something else. But we'll just go rewind to the tradition as it existed in India in Buddha's time, was the idea that the soul is something that lives in your body. The Hare Krishnas are very big on this version of Atman. So they actually will show you pictures in their books of what the Atman looks like. And it's this little sort of Krishna-looking thingy that exists right in the middle of your chest, right here where Godzilla is. So right behind Godzilla would be my Atman. And that is the true you. And when you die, the Atman leaves the body and then enters another body that's just being born, and then it's reborn. That's the older idea. Of course, as I say, later versions of Hinduism don't have that idea, but, there you go. The Buddha didn't like the idea of the soul, and he came up with the idea of the 5 skandhas, the 5 heaps, which are 5 things: form, feeling, perceptions, impulses, and consciousness that form together and kind of travel together throughout a lifetime and become a person and become a doggy like Ziggy. Ziggy's going over doing zoomies with my girlfriend's mom. I don't know if you can hear that right now. He's happy today. So anyhow, that's what that is, and that was Katagiri Roshi's commentary on it, and I probably should have said all that stuff that I said at the end of the video, at the beginning of the video, but I didn't, so I said it at the end, and I'm sorry. Anyway, if you want to help send me money so that I can make more videos and reverse the order, you can send money right here to that URL you're seeing on the screen. That is my only way of making a living right now, and I hope that changes soon, but still, for now, only way of making a living. So I really appreciate your donations, and thank you very much for them. But if you're having financial trouble, don't donate to me, because I'm not desperate. But the reason I'm not desperate is because so many people keep donating, so that really is nice of you, and I thank you very much. We will see you later. Have a good time all the time. Thank you and goodbye. Ziggy, how you doing? Having a good time out here?